You think you are doing something healthy. You buy the fresh bag, you pile it into a smoothie every morning, maybe fold it into an omelet at lunch, toss it into a salad at dinner, and because it is green, and because every wellness account you follow says it is a superfood, you tell yourself it must be helping. It feels responsible. It feels smart. But for some people, eating one particular vegetable every single day can quietly push the body in the wrong direction. Not dramatically, not overnight, but slowly, steadily, in ways that do not announce themselves until something hurts. I'm talking about spinach. Not because spinach is evil, not because one bowl is going to poison you, but because repeated exposure to its oxalates can create real problems in the kidneys, in mineral balance, and in the way your body processes what looks, on the surface, like a perfect health habit. A lot of you will be wondering how something that has been praised for decades can suddenly become a concern. And that is exactly the right question to ask. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, I am going to show you who specifically needs to be careful, why eating raw spinach every day is fundamentally different from eating occasional cooked spinach, and what to eat instead if spinach has quietly become your automatic default. The part most people completely miss is this. It is often not the spinach itself that causes the problem. It is the dose, the frequency, the preparation method, and the foods you eat around it that change the story entirely. I am Dr. Steve Collins, and as a doctor who spends a great deal of time helping people protect their long-term health, I care about this topic because healthy habits can sometimes backfire in ways nobody warned you about. By the end of this video, you will know exactly when daily spinach is fine, when it is not, and how to make a smarter choice without losing any of the benefits of eating more greens. I have a simple rule in my own kitchen. I do not let one so-called superfood become an everyday reflex. That single habit, honestly, has saved people from turning a genuinely good food into a quietly damaging pattern. Spinach is packed with folate, carotenoids, vitamin K, and a range of useful plant compounds. And I want to be clear about that because I am not going to overstate the risk here. Spinach can absolutely be healthy, but here is what does not make it onto the label, and what rarely comes up in the conversation about superfoods. Spinach is also one of the richest dietary sources of a compound called oxalate. And oxalate, when the conditions inside your body are right, becomes a serious problem. Think of oxalate like fine grit suspended in wet cement. On its own, just sitting there, it may not cause much trouble. But when it binds with calcium under the right conditions, it can form crystals. And those crystals are the raw material for calcium oxalate kidney stones. The National Kidney Foundation notes that calcium oxalate stones are the most common type of kidney stone, and spinach sits firmly on the high oxalate warning list for people prone to forming them. The National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases gives the same explicit warning to people who have already had a calcium oxalate stone episode. So when someone sits across from me and tells me they put large handfuls of raw spinach into a blended smoothie every single morning, I do not panic. But I do pay close attention, because a blended drink makes it remarkably easy to consume a far larger oxalate load than you would ever manage by chewing through a normal plate of food. That distinction, how much you consume and in what form, matters far more than most people ever realize. When I review the long-term routines people have built up year after year, I notice something else happening that makes this worse. People often assume the answer to a kidney stone problem is to cut calcium from their diet, because the stone literally has the word calcium in its name. And here is where the logic becomes dangerously backwards. The opposite is often true. Calcium, consumed in the right place at the right time, is actually protective against stone formation. Here's the way to think about it. Calcium acts like a dance partner for oxalate. It grabs oxalate inside the gut before that oxalate ever gets absorbed into the bloodstream and makes its way to the kidneys. When oxalate meets calcium in the intestine, a large portion of it leaves the body through the stool rather than the urine. The problem is avoided before it even begins. There was a landmark study published in the New England Journal of Medicine that followed more than 45,000 men and found that higher dietary calcium was actually linked to a lower risk of symptomatic kidney stones, not a higher risk. And a separate New England Journal of Medicine clinical trial in men who already had recurrent calcium oxalate stones found that a diet with normal calcium, lower salt, and lower animal protein protected significantly better than simply cutting calcium, which, if you let that sink in for a moment, is quite remarkable. So the practical tip here is straightforward. If you eat spinach, do not eat it alone as though the green color makes it complete. Eat it alongside yogurt, cheese, kefir, or another calcium-containing food in the same meal, and do not defer your calcium to later in the day when the spinach is already long absorbed. That timing is everything. I rarely use raw spinach in large quantities in my own meals anymore, and the reason is not fear, it is chemistry. Raw spinach carries a high soluble oxalate load, and soluble oxalate is the form most readily absorbed into the body. Cooking changes that. A study published in Food Science and Technology Research examined what happened to spinach when boiled at 100 degrees Celsius for just 2 minutes. The result? Roughly 67% of the oxalic acid was removed, while approximately 77% of the beneficial lutein was preserved. Think of it like rinsing sand out of rice before cooking. You keep the food, you keep most of its nutritional value, but you remove a large portion of the compound you do not want, as long as you drain and discard the cooking water afterward. That last part matters. Do not use the water you boiled spinach in as a base for soup or sauce if your goal is to lower oxalate. The oxalate has moved into that water, and adding it back in defeats the purpose entirely. Does this mean smoothies are always a problem? Not necessarily. But the form you consume spinach in matters enormously. And this is where a surprising number of health-conscious people get quietly caught out every single day. There is a phrase that always makes me slow down and ask better questions when a patient says it: "I'm doing a cleanse." Juice cleanses and giant green smoothies can concentrate oxalate in a way that the body does not handle well, particularly when they replace whole meals over multiple days. There was a case report published in the American Journal of Kidney Diseases describing a 65-year-old woman who developed acute oxalate nephropathy, a severe and sudden form of kidney damage, following an oxalate-rich green smoothie cleanse. She had other risk factors as well, and that context is important. I am not telling you that one smoothie will damage your kidneys, and I am not going to overstate what a single case report can prove. But case reports do tell us what is biologically possible when a pattern becomes extreme. Imagine pouring bucket after bucket of fine crystals through a narrow filter. The filter copes for a while. Then one day, under the right set of circumstances, it does not. So if your version of healthy living involves blending enormous quantities of raw spinach every morning simply because chewing it would take too long, that is worth reconsidering. Rotate your greens, use kale one day, rocket another, bok choy the next. Eat a varied whole meal instead of defaulting to a liquid shortcut every morning. And keep this question somewhere in the back of your mind as we continue. Are you eating spinach or are you dosing yourself with it? Because that distinction is where this whole conversation lives. Here is something that genuinely surprised me the first time I looked carefully at the data. Spinach does contain calcium. It shows up clearly on the nutrition label, but the amount your body actually absorbs from it is far lower than the number suggests. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition compared calcium absorption from spinach against calcium absorption from milk in 13 healthy adults. The test meals were matched for calcium content, meaning participants were given the same stated amount of calcium from each source. The result was striking. The body absorbed approximately 5% of the calcium from spinach, compared to roughly 28% from milk. 5%. The label looks impressive. The biological reality is not. Spinach calcium is locked up by oxalate, and that binding makes most of it unavailable to the body no matter how much you consume. This is why I become genuinely concerned when someone tells me they eat spinach every day specifically for calcium. It sounds like a sensible plan. It is not the best strategy your body has available. Think of it like money locked inside a safe with no working combination. The value exists on paper, but access is poor. If your real goal is bone support, mineral density, or simply getting calcium that your body can actually use, you are better served by lower oxalate greens, kale, bok choy, turnip greens, or by calcium-rich foods your intestine can absorb with much greater efficiency. Keep spinach as one player in a varied lineup, not the captain you choose every single day without question. Some of you will be thinking right now, fine, but I have never had a kidney stone. So why does any of this apply to me? That is a completely fair response, and it is one I take seriously. The answer is that risk is not distributed equally across all bodies. Some people handle dietary oxalate comfortably. Others have a significantly narrower margin for error. If you have a history of calcium oxalate stones, inflammatory bowel disease, fat malabsorption, certain types of bariatric surgery, chronic dehydration, or periods following heavy antibiotic use, your body's ability to safely manage oxalate loads can be meaningfully reduced. Oxalate handling is not just about what you eat. It depends on what your gut absorbs, what your kidneys are asked to filter, and how your individual metabolism processes it all. In older metabolic studies, researchers demonstrated that dietary oxalate increases urinary oxalate levels, and that stone formers responded to the same dietary load differently from people who had never formed a stone. In plain language, the same meal lands very differently in different bodies. That is why blanket nutrition advice creates so much confusion. One person drinks a daily spinach smoothie for years and reports no problems. Another person, with a stone history or a gut condition they may not even be aware of, quietly nudges themselves toward another painful episode. So the practical move here is not panic, it is context. If any of those risk factors sound familiar, do not make spinach your automatic green every day of the week. Speak with your clinician, get advice that fits your personal history, and think in terms of patterns over time rather than obsessing over any single food. There is another layer to this that almost nobody in the wellness conversation talks about, and that is sodium. I have watched people carefully track their spinach portions while completely overlooking the dressings, processed soups, packaged breads, and restaurant meals, surrounding every salad they eat. Why does sodium matter here? Because higher sodium intake causes the kidneys to spill more calcium into the urine. More urinary calcium means more company for oxalate exactly where you do not want it. And that is where crystal formation becomes more likely. The NIDDK addresses this directly in its kidney stone guidance, and that New England Journal of Medicine trial I mentioned earlier did not simply maintain normal calcium in the diet. It also reduced salt and animal protein simultaneously. That combination, normal calcium, less sodium, less animal protein, reduced stone recurrence more effectively than cutting calcium alone. So if you are eating daily spinach while telling yourself the rest of your diet is clean, but your meals are routinely high in hidden sodium, you may be working quietly against yourself without realizing it. The analogy is simple. If oxalate is the spark, sodium helps stack the dry wood around it. The practical advice here is unglamorous and it works. Taste your condiments, read ingredient labels, and stop assuming a meal is low risk simply because the leafy base looks virtuous. Sometimes the problem is not the green at all. It is the salty world you have built around it. I also think people need better alternatives, not just a list of things to stop, because just stop rarely produces lasting change. When I want a leafy green several times a week, I lean heavily on kale, bok choy, cabbage, and broccoli. Not because they are fashionable, but because the body handles them significantly better from a mineral absorption standpoint. Research published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that calcium absorption from kale in healthy women averaged approximately 41%, slightly higher in that study than from milk. Separate work on brassica vegetables found calcium absorption rates of around 48 to 52% from broccoli, bok choy, and kale combined. Compare that to 5% from spinach, and you start to understand why the default healthy green choice deserves more scrutiny. Rotating your greens is not deprivation, it is strategy. You still get vibrant color, dietary fiber, folate, vitamin K, and a broad range of phytochemicals, but with far less repetition and considerably better mineral availability. Build a green rotation you can actually remember and sustain. Kale for sautéing, bok choy for stir fries, romaine for salads, fresh herbs for flavor, broccoli as a side, and spinach as an occasional guest, rather than the permanent fixture it has somehow become in so many people's daily lives. That one shift, from obsession to rotation, makes healthy eating feel less rigid and far more intelligent. I also want to say something clearly because it gets lost in sensationalist online conversations about food. Spinach is not junk food. It is not toxic in the dramatic internet sense of the word. I still eat it. I simply respect it. That is a very different mindset than fear. A randomized controlled trial published in Clinical Nutrition Research found that spinach, as a source of dietary nitrate, improved certain measures related to arterial stiffness in healthy adults. So yes, there are genuine evidence-supported benefits here. That is precisely why this topic is so easy to get wrong in both directions. The problem is not that spinach has no value. The problem is that people hear healthy and translate it without thinking into more is better, every day, forever. But biology does not work like a social media trend. Dose matters, variety matters, preparation matters, and your personal medical history matters more than any general food label. Think about sunlight. You need some. Too much, too often, without protection, and the very thing that supports your health begins causing damage. Food operates the same way, more often than people ever expect. Almost everyone asks me the same thing at this point. How much is too much? I understand why the question feels urgent. I wish I could give you a clean, universal number. I cannot, and I am not going to manufacture one, because that would be overstating the evidence. The real answer depends on portion size, preparation method, hydration levels, your individual gut health, your kidney history, and what else you eat alongside it throughout the day. But I can give you a practical frame that is far more useful than a specific gram count. A side of cooked spinach once or twice a week alongside a balanced meal that includes a calcium source is a fundamentally different situation than a towering raw salad at lunch and a concentrated green smoothie at breakfast 7 days a week. When I help people reconsider this habit, I ask them to zoom out over an entire week, rather than analyzing a single meal. How many times did spinach appear? Was it blended, juiced, or concentrated? Did it come alongside calcium and enough fluid? Or did it show up during fasting periods, after heavy sweating, with very little hydration? Those questions reveal far more than any specific gram target ever could. If you love spinach, keep it in your life, but give it appropriate boundaries. Use smaller portions. Cook it more often than you drink it raw and concentrated. Pair it with calcium in the same sitting. And do not confuse a consistent routine with an automatically safe one. The body thrives on rhythm, but it also needs variety. That difference is precisely where many modern wellness habits either protect us or quietly undermine us over time. Water. I know, boring answer. But this is genuinely where a great deal of kidney stone prevention actually lives, and it deserves more than a passing mention. The National Kidney Foundation recommends enough daily fluid to produce a meaningful volume of urine, often somewhere in the range of 8 to 12 cups per day for many adults, adjusted for body size, activity level, and climate. The reason is straightforward. Concentrated urine is like a crowded, slow-moving motorway for crystals. Everything is compressed together, and particles collide and cluster far more easily. Dilute that system sufficiently, and you make crystal formation significantly less likely, regardless of what you ate. If you sweat heavily, live in a hot climate, practice intermittent fasting, or simply drift through most of the day without drinking much, then daily high oxalate spinach becomes more of a calculated risk, because the kidneys are managing a smaller, more concentrated fluid volume with less room for error. The practical advice is intentionally simple. Watch the color of your urine throughout the day. Pale straw is the range you want most of the time. If it is consistently darker, you are not drinking enough for your current level of activity and food intake. And on days when you know you are eating higher oxalate foods, be even more deliberate about hydration from the start of the day rather than trying to catch up later. Before we finish, let me give you the version of this I would share with a close friend over dinner, without jargon, without hedging, just honest advice. Do not fear spinach. Do not worship it either. If you are generally healthy, well hydrated, and eat spinach occasionally as part of a varied diet, there is no reason for concern. If you are eating large raw portions every single day, particularly concentrated in smoothies or cold-pressed juices, that is where I would pull you back and ask you to reconsider. If you have had calcium oxalate stones, significant gut issues that increase oxalate absorption, bariatric surgery, chronic dehydration, or kidney disease of any kind, I would urge you to be much more careful and to have a specific conversation with your own doctor about your individual situation. In the meantime, use smaller portions of spinach, cook it more often than you eat it raw, pair it consistently with a calcium source in the same meal, rotate through a range of other greens across the week, and stop granting any food a permanent free pass simply because it is green or because it has been marketed as a superfood. That is the real takeaway here. Healthy eating is not about repeating one supposedly clean choice until it becomes invisible habit and blind spot. It is about matching your food intelligently to your body, your history, and your actual biology. And that is where good common sense and good medicine finally meet. Thank you for spending this time with me. I genuinely appreciate it. If this shifted the way you think about your daily salad or morning smoothie, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who could benefit from a more balanced view of healthy eating. I have done a full video on kidney stone prevention and another on foods people assume are healthy, but that may actually be working against them. So explore the channel if you want to go further. Take care of yourself, keep asking better questions, and I will see you in the next one.